On today's World Insight, leaving no child behind. That's the goal of UNICEF. But how can the organization achieve this as conflicts grow stronger around the globe? Here are the answers in an exclusive interview with UNICEF's Executive Director.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian. Children often bear the brunt of global crises, from conflict displacement to natural disasters and extreme poverty, which has disrupted millions of lives. About 9 out of every 10 Gaza civilians have been displaced, half of them children, and over 4.5 million children from Sudan have fled their homes, the world's largest child displacement. The United Nations Children's Fund, or UNICEF, has been intensifying its work to address not only immediate humanitarian needs, but also long-term development challenges for the children. Together, China and UNICEF have been working together to make significant progress in addressing key issues affecting children, advancing their health, education, well-being, and bringing significant benefits to children in China and also beyond. On these and more, I spoke to Catherine Russell, UNICEF Executive Director, to find out how the organization is working to support children every step of the way, even in a changing world. Madam Executive Director, what a pleasure to see you here in China.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I know you made a great trip.
It's been fantastic.
To Ningxia.
Yeah.
To see how the projects of so many different categories, being nurtured and vibrant over there. Tell us more about what you have seen.
Well, first of all, it's great to be here in China and to get a sense of, when you see China from the outside, I mean, so much incredible progress has been made. UNICEF has been such a proud partner of that, but there are some remaining challenges here, and that's really what I saw in Ningxia. Some places where populations are a little bit more excluded or in more rural places where they're not necessarily in big cities. And so I saw some great things, some work that we're doing with community health workers to train mothers about how they should treat their babies when they're first born, skin-to-skin contact, breastfeeding, things like that. I met some fantastic children who have been, had some of their own challenges, and the work that we do with the community there to support the children, community health workers and social workers who visit these families directly and see what their issues are and try to help them and support the children. I met one mother who had just had the baby, literally like 2 days before, and she was telling me she has an older daughter and now she had the baby son, and she was telling me how she was breastfeeding the child, and really she was so interested in making sure her child got off to the best start. And I think that's what every mother wants, right? They love their children so much, they want to know the best ways, but sometimes they don't know, and I think working with them, making sure they understand that there are things that they can do that will make the child healthier and more productive in the future is what everyone wants, and it's a privilege for UNICEF to be able to help in that regard.
Absolutely. There is a lot of know-hows, particularly at the locality that's needed.
For sure. And that's what UNICEF has, right? Because we work in 190 countries. We've been doing it for decades. So we get to bring the expertise that we have to other countries and to say, hey, here are some ideas that we have, things that you can pilot, try here, and then hopefully, the great thing about China is China can then take things to scale in the country because you have the capacity here to do that, and you have the commitment to do that, commitment to children, and you can see over the years the work at reducing, issues like, child mortality. That has been so impressive here, making sure that every child is immunized, making sure that children go to school. There's already been so much progress, and it shows that China has the capacity to do it. Now we just need to make sure that no child is left behind here and that we can help in that. And that's really the work that we're doing.
Right, especially when China is going through the urban transformation. And it is quite a process. And as we know, the world goes ups and downs, so there's a lot of adjustment that needs to be done.
Sure.
How is it like to interact with the locals, the sentiment that you felt over there?
Yeah, listen, first of all, people here are so warm and welcoming. Everyone has been that way since I met them. But the interesting thing is I saw exactly what you're talking about, which is that in some cases, children are left behind because their parents have to go someplace else to work.
Yeah.
Right? So they're left with the grandparents. And so making sure that the grandparents understand, the world has changed since they had children anyway, right? There are new practices, new ideas, and the grandparents need to understand that. But also making sure they have the support they need. And so I met one little girl. She was so sweet, and she was being raised now by her grandparents. And the social worker was there when I was there, and I got to see their interactions, and the interactions were so warm and supportive. The social worker was so caring and was, working with her to do a puzzle, and it was really so wonderful to see that. So it's not just the skills and the, teaching them things. It is really the love that I saw that was really so compassionate and so special. And you think, this little girl, she doesn't have her mother, her father had died, and that's a very sad situation for a child, right? And she had her grandparents, but to give the support to the grandparents so they can do the raising that needs to take place for that little girl, I think will change her life. And that's this amazing privilege of UNICEF, right? That we get to change lives all over the world.
Kathy, what you're saying just now is really one of the crystallization, shall I say, story of China that's ongoing right now, because earlier it was mainly about feeding the population, right? Get enough food to eat. At least the children can go to school free of charge. But now it's more about how can we make sure it can be high quality development and better quality life for the common folks. So you went to Ningxia. That's really one of the provinces in western part of China. Very different from Beijing, Shanghai,
very different.
Hong Kong, so different, right?
Yeah, very different, but so beautiful, really amazing. But you can see that it's just they have some catching up to do, I think. And I think, you don't want in any country to have anyone left behind, and really trying to make sure that the most marginalized are included is a challenge everywhere. And I think the work that we're doing here with China is really important, and I saw that for myself.
Kathy, I was told through the grapevine that you were insisting on having a trip to China because you see this is an important partnership to build on. How would you describe at this stage the cooperation between UNICEF and China?
Yeah, I think it's sort of two pieces of it.
Yeah.
One is here in China, the work we're doing is a continuation of the work that's been going on for decades, and really trying to close the remaining gaps. I mean, China has done so well over the years in so many ways, but there are some remaining challenges, as I say, that we need to really make sure that we're addressing and taking to scale in the country, so that, these ideas of social workers and community health workers, making sure that children have care for mental health issues, things like that are really important, and I think are places that we can work together. China is also a leader around the world in many different respects, and I think China plays an important role in helping other countries as well, and UNICEF is a part of that too. And I think both those avenues are really important and things that we're focused on here in China.
I remember earlier there were a lot of cooperation between UNICEF and China, for example, about procurement of raw materials, about regional support centers. How are they evolving as the world is changing? I know your work is getting ever more challenging, unfortunately.
It's every day is a little bit more challenging, or challenging in different ways. UNICEF has a huge, and I didn't realize this until I came to UNICEF, but a lot of what we do is procuring supplies. And we have this massive center in Copenhagen and a couple of other places, but where we are able to move supplies so quickly. So if there's an emergency that comes up, we're able to get things out as quickly as possible. And it's really incredible. And I think China is an important part of that, because we purchase supplies from China, and it has been a pretty big part of what we do. We purchase a lot of supplies here, and I imagine that will continue and probably grow. And it's an important role that China can play in the world. And I think especially during COVID, it was a lot of resources that were purchased here. So I think that's a place where we'll continue the work. We have the person who runs that whole operation is coming here again to China to work together. So it's just another example of the partnership and the ways that we can work together to try to help children around the world.
I managed to meet some of your co-workers when they were traveling to China, and got to know the many facets of your work, not only here in China, but also beyond. Yeah. Having said that, though, how do you see the discussion about, for example, a lot of work being done on South-South cooperation, but we also know North-South cooperation, or cooperation just among all, extremely important.
Exactly.
So how do you, as an UN agency working in 119 countries and regions, articulate the skills and the capacity building in order to have all these economies and countries and regions to work together?
Look, it's the big question, right? I mean, I think when you sit back and look at the world, there are huge challenges. And UNICEF has two mandates. One is development, which is to help countries along their journey of developing and improving their social welfare, their education systems, their healthcare. We also work in humanitarian context, which is so consuming right now, honestly. I mean, we continue to do the development work, of course, but the humanitarian work is so challenging because we have one conflict after another. And if you think about children and what happens to them in a conflict, it's truly devastating. I think, first they're impacted directly. They can be killed or maimed or orphaned. I mean, terrible things happen to children in these contexts. But children rely on social services, right? So education, healthcare. What happens in a conflict? Those are completely disrupted. So children, let me give you an example in Sudan as an example. I was there not too long ago. They have 19 million children overall. 17 million of those children have been out of school for a year, and there's no sign that they're going back anytime soon. Children there are facing tremendous malnutrition. It's the hugest displacement crisis in the world. Children are on the move. And I met some of these children when I was there, and it's crushing to see what's happening to their lives. But it was so interesting because I met some girls. I was at a camp that UNICEF supports for children who've been moved. And some of them had come from Khartoum, had moved several times because they're always at risk. Their families keep fleeing. And so they're in this camp that UNICEF supports. And I was talking to the girls, and there were 4 of them, and they were about 12 years old. And they were telling me what it was like. And I said, well, how do you think about your future? And the interesting thing was, they kept telling me, look, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a nurse. I want to be a lawyer. I was really so moved by that because I thought their lives have been
almost
crushed
deprived
completely.
Already, yeah.
But they still had hope. Right? They believe that the world may work out well for them. And for me, that's so moving because I feel like that's where we have to stay, in that place of hope, where we can try to give children some possibility of decent future, even if they're in the most horrific conflicts that they can even imagine. And I think that's what UNICEF brings to the table. And we also, because we do the development piece, even in these humanitarian conflicts, we're trying to build the seeds of development so that when, God willing, these conflicts end, the country can get back on track. And we try to be there and be a really important part of the future of that country. But I mean, look, if you look at Gaza, Sudan, Afghanistan, DRC, the numbers, the places continue to grow and the challenges are immense, and children suffer so much in those places. War is always the worst enemy of children, and I think we just have to all join hands, and that's why this cooperation is important. Everyone needs to come together and think about what kind of world do we want. We want a world where children can survive and thrive, and that's what we're trying to do. And all of us have a stake in that future, and that's why the cooperation, however you describe it, South-South, North-South, however you went through that list, we all need to work together. We need to think about the kind of world we want to have for our children and grandchildren, and we need to work together to make it happen.
Some of the hotspot issues, as you just mentioned, lately there's a lot of development in the Middle East, for example, both in Gaza and recently even more in Lebanon. And mind-boggling, one could argue, the war, or at this moment, the military conflict has inflicted on the children. I know there are different organizations having different roles, talking to stakeholders in those conflicts. But as the UNICEF head, how would you call on the different stakeholders in those conflicts to step back and to at least respect the basic human rights of children.
Yeah. Well, it's an important role that we play. You know, I was in Gaza last November, so after the conflict started, I saw for myself what was happening there, which is devastating to the population. You know, children again on the move, lacking sanitation, obviously not in school again for over a year. These children have been out of school. It's a devastating situation for children, honestly. A lot of what we do, you know, so UNICEF is there. We're one of the biggest agencies working there with WFP to try to help the population. We provide all sorts of things for the population. It's very challenging. It's a very challenging environment to work in.
But one cannot expect an international organization to save the lives in conflicts for everyone,
It's challenging,
right?
no, but we
try.
try.
Your job, by the way.
But we're trying. You know what? The way I think about it is, the world is kind of crazy, and we're kind of the band-aids, and we're trying to, you know, do as much as we can to help around the children who are affected there. Yeah.
How
but it's
flexible
devastating.
the bandages have to be
They
in
have
order
to,
to patch us
You just
over
need a
all
lot
these
of them. You need a lot of them, and it is really, it's a very tough environment for sure. But a lot of what we do, so we do the on-the-ground response, and UNICEF, I mean, really, the people who I met there, our staff there, it was interesting because they were telling me about, a lot of them are national staff, right? So they're from the countries where they work. And so they're, at the same time, they're trying to help other people. Their families are at risk. And one woman was telling me that, you know, so many members of her extended family had been killed, but she was still working on a water treatment program to help other people. That's an amazing thing, really, that sort of ability to think about others, even when your life is completely turned upside down and disrupted. But in any case, so we're there, we're trying to do the best we can, but we also do a lot of advocacy and try to say, look, we need peace. Children everywhere need peace. They can't survive in these situations where their lives are completely disrupted. And one of the really heartbreaking things that sticks with me about Gaza is we have at least 1,000 children who need some sort of artificial limbs, right, because they've been hurt. And the interesting thing about that is, if you needed an arm or, you know, an artificial, you would be fitted and that would be fine. But children need to be fitted every 6 months because they grow, right?
Yeah.
And I hadn't, of course, it's so obvious, but I hadn't really thought about it. And when you think about the challenge of not just getting them, you know, dealt with once, but then continuing to do that, it's crazy. Now, having said that, we are doing a polio vaccination campaign there. We did a successful first round. We're now almost finished with the second round. So it's possible to provide services, but it's very, very difficult.
Do you get chances and opportunity to talk to those politicians? I know you are not in geopolitics, but from the humanitarian's perspective, to ask them directly.
Yeah, we do a lot of advocacy. For us, what we say is, first, peace is best. We need peace. If there is a conflict, there are rules that need to be abided by, and children need to be protected as best as possible. That is in everyone's interest, because if you think about when a conflict ends, you know, then what, right? Somebody has to pick up the pieces. Those children have to be cared for, or what happens to them, right? We need to be thinking that way. And so my job really is that advocacy piece, to make sure that children are not forgotten in these discussions.
And also, as you said, the local staff on site, right? How is their welfare, especially security, going to be taken care of? We know that there were earlier cases, not necessarily your organization within the UN, but others, that has been lives being taken away, families certainly being hurt. So, because you're not only working for children, but also work for the many men and women of your organization. How does that work?
You know, it's a constant worry. Sometimes I feel like, you know, I'm like a mother of all of these, and I worry so much about all of them, and I have to always approve these different, you know, very high risk
regions, operations
things that we do. Yeah, it's very nerve-wracking. I think that, you know, from my perspective, they are the most, literally the most courageous people ever. They care so much about their communities, and they care about the world, and that's why they're doing the work they're doing. But humanitarian workers are really at high risk. And I think in the last year, the largest number of humanitarian workers killed has ever happened. And that has to be a worry for everyone, because the people who are willing to go into those places, risk their lives, leave their families behind. I mean, honestly, they're doing such courageous work, and we all need to do a better job of protecting humanitarian workers and making sure that they are not casualties in this process as well, because long-term, the implications of that are very challenging.
I'm feeling very empathetic when you are talking about that, because I'm seeing it as a journalist. Some of the bottom lines of human being has been right now being challenged. What is being stated clearly in the international convention has been obviously violated in some of the international conflicts we're seeing today.
The journalists are so courageous. Honestly, I have such huge admiration for them. Both the local journalists from in Gaza, for example, there really aren't international.
And Lebanon too.
Journalists, yeah, it's very challenging. But the local journalists are so brave, and they definitely put their lives at risk all the time. And I would say around the world, journalists are really brave. And I don't know that they sign up for that. You know, if you're a humanitarian worker, you sort of know, but I mean, journalists are incredibly, I've met some of these people who are so incredibly brave, and I have just the greatest admiration because they risk everything to bring the story to other people, and that's really important.
Story of the children as well.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, more on the latest development in Lebanon, because it's something the newest in terms of conflicts. There seems to be very lack of discussions about what needs to be done. How are you preparing for the welfare of the children there? Do you have to prepare for the worst scenario? What is the way that you and your colleagues are getting done right now?
Yeah, it's a challenging environment for sure. We have been in Lebanon for a long time. We have a lot of staff there. We have a lot of people also who work in our organization who are from Lebanon and are worried about their families. You know, one woman who works closely with me, she was trying to get her parents to move. I mean, it's just so stressful to imagine that. I think that the challenge in Lebanon is so many people have been displaced. And it's very worrying. We're there, we're increasing our efforts there, trying to get more people in, trying to get more resources for Lebanon, just anticipating that it's going to be very, very difficult to try to put things back together. It hasn't been that great before. It was a challenging environment always to work in, and I've been there and seen that myself. But I think now it's just going to be very challenging. And we hope that all of this conflict ends soon so we can get back to the work of helping the children there. Mm-hmm.
You've been traveling around the world in your current role, certainly, and also in your previous roles. But there is a switch about working for one country or one government or one institution to now working for the cause of children worldwide. How do you make that transition?
It's such an interesting question. You're right. I mean, I have spent my career mostly working in my country. And honestly, I was very proud to do that. And I traveled around the world and I represented my country. And that was a certain kind of work that I was very, very proud to do. Now, it's a very different situation. You know, I work in an agency that represents people all around the world, children all around the world. I definitely feel the responsibility of that, and I sometimes think if I had known before I took the job how much it was, I'm not sure I would have been brave enough to do it, honestly. But the truth is, it's an amazing team, and I'm right now leading the effort, but this agency is full of people who've done this for years, who are so experienced and so expert and so committed to children that I just feel honored to be a part of it, honestly. And I really feel grateful for what UNICEF does every day, and I am so happy to get out and explain it. But the truth is, everywhere I go in the world, people know UNICEF and they respect it. And in many places, it's kind of like China, where UNICEF has been there on the journey with them, and people appreciate that. And now they're happy that they can turn around and help others, which is really the most wonderful thing ever.
You spoke out. I remember seeing footages of yours speaking, for example, in some of the major American media outlets, talking about the causes of children in Gaza lately. And I see you are making very strong statement, calling on people to respect the rights of children. I mean, in different countries, there are different aspects of understanding an issue. How would you get that across? You know, it's another challenge I would assume you have to face.
You know, I think that the privilege of working at UNICEF is that almost everyone in the world, and I can say that pretty universally, cares about children.
Indeed.
Right? I think sometimes they actually, like, if they can think about their own child or a child that they love, right? Some child somehow that they have met in their lives that means something to them. If they can put themselves in the place of people who are now suffering so much and whose children are suffering so much, I think they can understand. And I feel like that's in a way my job, is to say, look, these are children, right? Wars happen, countries have disputes, whatever. But children are children everywhere, and a child in the United States or China or Gaza, they're all the same, right? They're completely innocent. They don't start wars. They can't stop wars. They have nothing to do with that, but they suffer more than anyone. And if people can stop for a minute and think about that and hear some of the stories of what is happening to children in these places, I think a lot of people stop for a minute and say, that's not what we want. We don't want that, right? And it's not to say, I mean, I think from the time humans, started, there have been disputes and wars, whatever. But I don't have any illusion that I'm going to stop that. But I do want people to think for a minute about what is the impact on children, and can we as a world make a commitment to try to protect them as best we can. That's what all of us should do.
We devote a lot of time talking about conflicts and wars, but there are other priorities that you in UNICEF also work on. For example, harassment of girls and women. You literally put out a report regarding the numbers. It was horrendous. So we literally see so many different priorities you have to work on all at the same time. And some of the phenomena just didn't go away. For example, your report indicated how to balance the resources, the time span, and all of this, the patience also. I see that you have been trying to make a voice also in that regard. You also have rich experiences working with different priorities all at the same time. Tell me more about your thoughts about that now. Yeah.
Listen, it's challenging, right? Because if you think about working with children, you have to think about the whole child, right? So that means pretty much everything, right? They need to be safe, they need to be healthy, they need to be educated. What you're referring to is a report we put out about the just really horrific numbers of children who have suffered some form of sexual violence in their lives. That's a terrible thing for children. I think, we as a world have to keep all of these things in mind at the same time, and that's what UNICEF does. And again, we have an amazing team that can bring the expertise to bear. What we're trying to do is, our job is to help countries have the capacity to deal with these problems themselves, right? And so on this issue that you're raising, we would go to countries and say, look, there are high rates in this country of sexual violence. These are the ways that we have seen in so many other contexts of trying to deal with them. One of the important parts of this report is thinking about what does that look like in a digital landscape, right? Because we are very focused on trying to make sure that more and more children have access to digital devices and digital learning, because it's so important, and it's a way that children and people can be divided in the world, right? Where people who don't have any access to digital devices can be left behind. So we want them to have it, but there are risks that go along with that. And one of those risks is that you can really be vulnerable to sexual sort of content and really what we would consider sexual violence on these devices. So making sure that as these things develop and are taken up, that we're doing whatever we can to make sure that children are protected, either through laws or through practices that we encourage. And so I think that's our job, and we have to do really all these things at one time. We can't say you can just make sure a child's not hungry. No, we have to do all the things. And again, our job is not to do that, but to help countries do it. That's where we are valuable. We can't, UNICEF is a big organization. We have a lot of resources. We can't fix these problems on our own. It's up to countries to do that, and there are so many partners that want to be a part of that, some from the private sector, other governments, multilateral organizations. We try to set the course and say this is what needs to happen for children, and hope that everyone can come in with us and do the work.
Mm-hmm. Madam Executive Director, what a pleasure to see you here in Beijing.
Thank you so much.
And thank you so much for your time. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for being with us. Bye for now.